Hello there! So originality is dead. Everything you see is a rehash of something that's already been done before. Tons of people have explained this in the past, and tons of people have used explaining this as another example of why nothing is original. As anyone could guess, this applies to mapping as well, but it's not every day people in the OSU community find it worth talking about. Kreutz uploaded a map last week of Baby Metal's song Road of Resistance. That name may be familiar since Monstrata ranked a map of the same song about a year ago, and the similarity between the two maps here caused a bit of controversy. Some patterns are undoubtedly similar between the two maps, though Kreutz claims it's a coincidence things ended up being alike. I don't really care if Kreutz copied Monstrata or if he's an innocent mapper being attacked for something he didn't really do. Instead, what I want to look at is the why behind this situation. Why are repeated elements in maps of the same song frowned upon by so many players and mappers? First, let's address the maps at hand, the two Road of Resistance maps. From what I can see, the main concern most people have relates to plagiarism. Because this map repeated so many specific elements of Monstrata's map without reference, people found it to be a problem. Okay, sure, makes sense. It's common courtesy to respect a mapper's original work, but let's say, hypothetically, Kreutz did intentionally copy certain sections of Monstrata's map. Would everyone be happy if he nicely asked for permission or gave him credit? That would avoid the whole issue of plagiarism. Regardless of how rankable it is, I think we'd still find a large party dissatisfied with repeated patterns between the two maps, as evidenced by another one of Monstrata's maps. The top two difficulties on this map set are themed around the movie Kimi no Nawa, by showing the relationship between two characters through two similarly designed difficulties. Both of these maps use the same concepts for spacing, rhythm, movement, and pretty much everything throughout, making it a repetitive experience. Which is the point. I think most people already understand that. Even though the theme makes sense, the map set received tons of criticism for essentially the same thing as the two Road of Resistance maps. They use nearly the same patterns for the same parts of the song. So yeah, plagiarism is worth complaining about, but it's not the only problem here. What makes people mad about these repeated elements then? As I've already said, people don't like the idea behind these two maps. This isn't because OSU players can't see their value, but rather because OSU players know OSU is still, at its core, a game. Before this map reached ranked status, there were even more similarities between the two difficulties. According to this QAT member, the similarities were essentially a manipulation of the score system, giving players the ability to play the same map twice and receive PP or score for each play. Such a thing just isn't allowed for ranked maps, and so both difficulties needed changes before anything was pushed towards rank. While this case was a matter of rankability, a good amount of players did share the same sentiment, and so some players complained using it as their justification. Monstrata did end up complying with the request for changes, despite what it may look like given the final product, and it was ranked a few days later. But even though the patterns weren't exactly the same anymore, the maps were still comparable to a degree that pissed a lot of people off.
What the fuck, it's the same map! It's the fucking same map!
While this issue is clearly apparent here, it's relevant to the bigger picture of mapping too. As Shurn said in response to the complaints on Road of Resistance, every modern map is designed the same already. Mappers learn to make maps in the theoretically best style, leading to this situation. While he was more so referring to the plagiarism in this case, most people use this argument when talking about score manipulation as well. For example, well, wait. Do I really need to explain this? So many people have talked about this before, it's just boring. Mappers like it when their maps are enjoyed, players enjoy earning PP, so mappers act accordingly. They create maps to be as straightforward, playable, and rewarding as possible. Nearly every modern map has large spacing, sharp angles, no confusing rhythms, and so on. They're almost all the same thing. Yet, you don't see people complaining on every map thread about maps being similar. It's only really prominent on the Road of Resistance maps and this one. Look, everyone's talked about this. You're not stupid. People complain about these maps because they're obvious. Unlike all the modern maps Shurn implies, these ones are clear with their repeated elements, so it's easy for literally anyone to see the possible score manipulation. Alright, pack it up, looks like the mystery's solved. People complained about this map because of obvious plagiarism, and this map because of obvious score manipulation. I should be satisfied, but I feel like something's missing. I've ranked maps of this same song twice, Apocalyptica's Hall of the Mountain King. One was my third ranked map made a long time ago, before I knew much about mapping at all, and the other was about a year later, when I was a bit more capable at mapping. They're both pretty different because my way of mapping changed drastically within that time frame. Now though, it's tempting. I see this Apocalyptica album comes with a third rendition of Hall of the Mountain King. what if I made a difficulty where I copied a few sections of my already ranked versions and mapped the rest in a completely different way? That seems like a pretty cool idea. However, if I push this towards rank, I'd easily bet people would be mad about it. It's not plagiarism because they're my own maps, and it's not score manipulation either because the maps are still highly different. So what really makes people complain about these specific situations? Well, I'll explain why soon, but first, Dark Souls. This, like pretty much every other game, has variety in its level design. The Dark Souls world offers a wide range of ideas to explore with each area, and that's part of what makes it, in my opinion, a good game. But wait a minute, the Dark Souls franchise does reuse the same area here. According to what I've just been talking about, that makes Dark Souls a bad game. Most people would argue no, the game isn't bad just because a location was used twice. It's something that makes the game more interesting from a lot of people's perspectives, and the reason for that is where level design in Dark Souls versus Osu differs. Dark Souls is a big deal. It was made by a professional video game developer and it was released by a professional video game publisher. A team of professionals created each level to fit a professionally directed game experience. Any given part of Dark Souls was made with the context of prior levels in mind, so that each level could be something relatively new for players. Even though this is the same location, it provides a completely different experience the first time a player sees it compared to the second. The reasons for it being interesting both times are much more than just a different paint job, and that's only really practical in a professionally directed game like Dark Souls. Yeah, sure, mappers could create a unique experience by reusing the exact same elements in two maps, but that's where things go wrong. Mappers. All mappers are not working towards a shared goal of making every map special. Unlike Dark Souls, Osu is a community-directed game. Maps only need to follow some simple rules to be promoted as official content. This map's idea was a unique experience, but it tells other mappers that ranking nearly the exact same map twice is perfectly okay. Another map using the same idea, or not trying to create a unique idea at all, wouldn't be a unique experience. And because Osu isn't a professionally directed game, there's nothing to stop that from happening. Except for the community. Every player knows that playing the same map twice can be boring, so even if they do appreciate this map's interesting idea, they also know it sets an example of what types of worthless experiences could come from future maps. The ranking process luckily exists to make sure repeated elements don't get too out of hand, and that's enhanced by Osu being a community-directed game. Anyone can voice their opinions, and because the community is responsible for the game's official content, these opinions do carry weight. So, in the case of these maps, the repeated elements were obvious enough for anyone to recognize as a possible problem for future community-designed content. Because anyone's opinions can have impact in a community-directed game, I think that's the reason why people complain. The whole reason. Sounds like a weird system, but it's for sure effective. Like, I wouldn't map this third Apocalyptica song with any copy-pasted sections because I don't want a bunch of people trying to lynch me in my map thread. But because the community is just anyone, its effectiveness can sadly turn into a downside. Whether the impact of community input is a good thing or not for map innovation is a topic for another time though. Anyway, yeah, those are my thoughts on this Road to Resistance controversy. Or that's what I'd like to say, but it's not entirely true. Everything I've talked about here has just been expanding on what Shern and this QAT already explained, plus the hundreds of other people who complain about PP mapping or mapping in general all the time. Nothing here is new information. But originality is dead, so what were you expecting? Thanks to these guys for supporting this video, and I'll see you next week.